On January 12, 1998, Deputy Kyle Dinkheller of the Lawrence County Sheriff's Office pulled over Andrew Brannon for a speed violation. What happened during that traffic stop has been seen millions of times by law enforcement officers, but never like this.
Shit! Stop now!
Kyle was, I tell everybody, Kyle was a typical kid, adult, whatever. Kyle loved his family. I mean, his daughter. She was the center of his world.
Driver, step back here to me. Come on back here for me.
He loved his friends. He loved the guys he worked with. If you called him in the middle of the night and said, hey, I'm broke down in Savannah, he'd get up and go help you.
Keep your hands out of your pocket, sir. Sir! You goddamn it, here I am. Shoot my fucking ass. Come here.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun to be around. A lot of fun to be around. Do stupid stuff just like any kid, but yeah.
Sir, get back. Where are you going? Sir, get back, now.
So he started out in the jail as a jailer, then went to mandate, then went to the road, then got killed. Hi, my name is Kirk Dinkheller, and this is Kyle's story.
In this edition of My Story, we will present the facts surrounding the death of Deputy Dinkheller through video analysis, a recreation,
Get back, sir, get back.
and through simulation technology. Throughout this presentation, Kyle's father, Kirk Dinkheller, will offer his thoughts and insight into his son's murder. A tactical debrief of the traffic stop will be done in order to offer training points to help officers be safer should they face a similar set of circumstances. We will also examine the aftermath families go through from not only this incident, but other officer-involved deaths. Finally, in a way that's never been done before, you will be placed into the traffic stop on that fateful day. Using VirTra's state-of-the-art simulation technology, officers will be able to apply what they've learned from this tragic encounter. After pulling off the freeway, the vehicle went down a frontage road about 100 yards past the last residence. This is where the driver, Andrew Brannon, a Vietnam War veteran, and Deputy Dinkheller meet. When the vehicles come to a stop, Brannon begins to open his door. He hesitates initially, but then Deputy Dinkheller calls out to him to exit his vehicle.
Driver, step back here to me. Come on back here for me.
Brannon again hesitates for a moment, but then walks back toward the rear of his vehicle. He then places his hands into his pockets, to which Deputy Dinkheller, hand on his pistol, immediately tells him to take his hands out.
Keep your hands out of your pockets, sir.
Deputy Dinkheller continues to tell Brannon to take his hands out of his pockets, and at the same time, the deputy moves to the front of his squad car with his hand on his firearm. At this point, Brannon begins to taunt the deputy. He starts by performing a very bizarre dance next to his truck. He then tells Dinkheller to shoot him. Deputy Dinkheller calls for backup,
37 radio 1078.
which causes Brannon to charge at him. Dinkheller orders Brannon to get back several times,
Get back now, sir.
and Brannon backs off slightly, only to move toward Dinkheller a second time. As Brannon does this, he verbally challenges the deputy. At one point, Brannon yells that he's a Vietnam combat veteran. Dinkheller continues to repeat, "Get back," his voice getting more intense and raised with each command. During this confrontation, Dinkheller deploys his baton, striking Brannon with it. Brannon then retreats toward the driver's side door of his own vehicle, with Deputy Dinkheller moving to the front of his patrol unit. As Brannon continues to open the door to his truck, Dinkheller continues to order Brannon away from his vehicle,
Sir, get back now!
while at the same time he begins to retreat toward the rear of his squad. Dinkheller makes one final plea.
I'm in fear of my life! Get back here now!
I'm in fear for my life. Dinkheller then realizes that Brannon has a gun and orders him to step away from the vehicle and put the gun down. He then radios that he has a man with a gun, I need help.
I got a man with a gun. I need help. Put the gun down!
5 times in total, Dinkheller orders Brannon to put the gun down, with Brannon ignoring him every time.
No! Put it down now! Fuck you!
Brannon then gets into a crouched position and a gun battle erupts. Neither man hits their intended target during the initial volley of shots. The dash cam footage captures the rounds impacting both of the vehicles. Brannon manages to bob up and down between Dinkheller's shots. Brannon then charges down the passenger side of the squad car, firing from the hip. When he reaches the rear of the squad, the shooting continues, striking Deputy Dinkheller several times.
Stop now!
Dinkheller crawls to the driver's side of his squad, and the men engage in a final firefight. Dinkheller lays down suppressing fire as he reloads and tries to move into a better position. Brannon then closes the distance on Dinkheller and fires several more times, striking the deputy. Brannon had been struck with 1 round to the stomach. He then fires a final shot.
Die, fucker!
That's where it ended. That's where my life ended right there. Kyle took 9 shots around the body and in the legs. When Kyle was down and he was done for, man walked up to him, stuck an M1 carbine in his right eye, pulled the trigger and said, "Die, motherfucker." Got in his truck and left.
Over the years, this incident has been broken down and analyzed for officer training countless times. There have been discussions on a number of the takeaways from this stop in regards to officer safety. For this discussion, we are going to focus on some of the more significant areas. We will look at Kyle's tactics, how he was trained, and if any outside influences played a role in that fateful day. Supervisors, peer pressure, and the fear of losing his job might have played a role on how Kyle handled Brannon. We will also delve into how a horrific situation like this impacts a family, and if that "should anything happen to me" conversation should happen. Kyle's traffic stop has been used as a training video for more than 20 years. Recruits today are seeing a video from before they were born. Veteran officers are so familiar with the video that they simply refer to it as the Dinkheller video. But why? What is in this video that drives training officers to continue to use it more than 2 decades after the incident?
It'll never get old. That training will be around long after I'm gone, and people will still watch it because of the fact it's an impactful video, it's a graphic video, but it also is a great training tool. In my opinion, it really puts training at the forefront. I mean, here you are, an officer by himself on a road, isolated road. The training that they had back then did not, in my opinion, prepare somebody for that kind of stop. On an isolated road, no backup. Closest backup was 25 miles away. And Kyle he'd only been an officer on the road for 2 years. So he really didn't he got in fights, hand-to-hand stuff, but never really was he confronted with somebody acting the fool that Brandon was acting. And it just kind of like, I could tell in Kyle's voice when I hear his voice on the video that he's like, oh shit, what have I gotten into? And I got nobody to help me. I got to do this on my own. And he wasn't ready. And I'll tell anybody, he's my kid, but he wasn't ready to handle somebody like Brandon. Somebody that had been there, done that, been in a war, shot people. Kyle had never shot anybody. He shot targets. Everybody shoots targets. And he was a good marksman. But when it come to shooting somebody else, he wasn't ready.
Part of the longevity to this incident may have to do with the fact that it was one of the first dashcam videos to capture the murder of an officer. But, more than likely, it's due to the fact there are a number of training points that can be learned from the video. And to add to what we already know about this incident, details have emerged about outside influences that may have contributed to Deputy Dinkheller's actions that day, events that were not caught on camera that fateful evening. In regards to this training course, we will focus on the following. First, we will look at the vehicle contact tactics that were trained and used by Deputy Dinkheller. We will also show how traffic stop training has changed in the last 20 years, and if other tactics might be more effective at controlling subjects during a traffic stop. Finally, a discussion on what tools Kyle had used and how effective they were. In addition to the tools he used, we'll also look into one item in particular that he couldn't use due to its placement.
Kyle did everything according to training through mandate and the training he got on the job. Kyle was just doing what he was trained.
When Deputy Dinkheller pulled Brandon over, it was normal procedure for his agency to have people exit their vehicles and walk back towards the officer.
Come on back here for me.
And while there may be times that having a driver exit the vehicle is necessary, in most cases, it is safer to keep the driver and occupants contained in the vehicle. Now, it could be argued that keeping Brandon in the vehicle would have just delayed his attack on Kyle. Perhaps. But keeping a subject inside the vehicle allows the officer to determine how and when they choose to approach.
Get back! Sir, get back now!
The vehicle can be a great tool in controlling people during a traffic stop, and might have been a way to prevent Brandon from ever accessing the rifle he used to gun down Deputy Dinkheller. Let's look at how keeping a person in a vehicle gives officers a tactical advantage during a vehicle contact. When an officer approaches the driver, they generally should stand behind the door at what is known as the B pillar. This puts the officer behind the subject and at an offset position. Officers must make sure that they have their right foot back on a driver's side approach, with their body angled toward the driver. Even for left-handed officers, it is important to take this stance, which will offer the most amount of your ballistic protection toward a potential attack. If the officer decides to perform a right-hand approach, the technique is the same. However, the officer will need to stand with their left foot back. Again, this offers the most protection to a potential attack. It's important to remember that the right-hand approach is generally safer due to the officer being away from traffic and having the element of surprise. In this example, we have a right-handed driver with a handgun. If they want to fire at the officer, there has to be a significant shift and reach by the occupant. If the occupant is armed with a rifle, these movements are even more exaggerated, if not impossible. This gives an officer several options ranging from moving off the X, retreating, or in some situations, going hands-on with the rifle. For a left-handed shooter, it is almost impossible for them to target an officer standing behind the B pillar, regardless of the type of firearm they are using. If an officer decides to have a subject come out of the vehicle, it's important to maintain control over that subject and not allow them to re-enter the vehicle unless the officer says to. One of the easiest and safest positions to speak with a person outside of their vehicle is to call them back to the front of your squad. Placing the subject between your headlights while standing by the passenger side front tire allows the officer to maintain control of the subject, as well as to continue to monitor the vehicle. It also provides a barrier, the front of the squad, between the officer and subject. The final option would be to stand off to the side, such as on a sidewalk if you're in a city setting, or along the side of the road in a rural or highway location. When positioning the subject from the vehicle, make sure that their back is toward their vehicle and that you are facing them. This will allow you to look at the subject as well as the vehicle. It also makes it harder for the person to try and communicate with anyone that might still be in their vehicle. When using this tactic, put enough distance between the subject and their vehicle. A preferred location is more toward your squad than their vehicle. The distance makes you less of a target to anyone that might still be in the vehicle. It also gives you more reactionary time if the person you're talking to decides to try and run back to their vehicle.
Every time I'm watching it, I'm screaming at the screen, kick his ass, go after him, get him. And I know what's gonna happen next in the video, and I can't change it. And I wanna change it. I want the outcome to be totally different, but I know it's not gonna be. It's the same ending every damn time.
Deputy Dinkheller began this encounter attempting to control Brannon with what most officers would consider their primary tool, their voice. Initially, the commands were simply for Brannon to come back toward Kyle.
Come on back here for me.
But as Brannon refused to cooperate, the commands came faster and with a frustrated and nervous tone.
I'm counting now. Get back, sir. Sir, get back.
These commands also start to sound a bit confusing, as Kyle is first ordering Brannon to come here.
Sir, come here.
And then telling him to get back.
Sir, get back now.
Once he does approach the deputy. And that's exactly what Brannon does. As a training point, commands should be clear and not contradict each other. Perhaps a command of stop or get down would be better than telling someone to come closer or back up. During this back and forth with Brannon, Kyle deploys his second tool, his baton.
Get back!
As Brannon charges the deputy, we hear him giving him the command to get back. After several attempts to have Brannon move back, Kyle strikes him with his baton. While this single strike stops Brannon from continuing to advance on Kyle, it is also the point at which he decides to go back to his vehicle. Based on the video and what we know about this incident, it doesn't appear that Kyle ever decided to finish the fight and handcuff Brannon. After the baton strike, it appears that Kyle had an opportunity to physically stop Brannon from going back to his vehicle. Kyle certainly could have stopped him, with the deputy being over 6 feet tall and more than 240 pounds. But he chose to revert back to giving Brannon commands.
Sir, step back!
There might have been a reason Kyle didn't continue to escalate his struggle with Brannon.
Kyle got in some good licks, tore his face up pretty good, and that's when the apology letter kicked in. I know it did, and he let him up. All he had to do was cuff him, but he let him up because that letter kicked in.
This letter has Kirk and some of Kyle's fellow officers convinced that Kyle was afraid to take appropriate action, more decisive action.
I would bear my life. Get back here now.
This letter and other outside influences will be discussed a bit later.
Not the gun. I need help.
When Kyle was an officer, electronic control devices, such as a taser, wouldn't become a law enforcement tool for another 5 years. Today, officers are able to effectively apply an electronic weapon should they encounter a similar situation. Generally, ECWs shouldn't be used as a capture device, but they can certainly be used to stop a subject from advancing on an officer. If an officer encounters a situation like Kyle did, the ECW can be deployed as the subject begins to move at the officer at an aggressive pace. Eventually, Kyle resorts to using his handgun, but that wasn't the final tool he had available. Most people are unaware that Kyle had another firearm available. He had an AR-15 at his disposal.
Kyle also had an AR-15 in the trunk of his car, and he was trying to get it. That's why he was at the back of his car trying to get his trunk lid open to get his AR, because they made him carry him in the trunk, along with their shotguns. They weren't allowed to keep them up front.
Considering the way that this incident progressed, this would have been a better firearm to use, but Kyle never had a chance to use his rifle. Depending on how his vehicle was equipped, this would have required him to open the trunk by either using the key or by pressing a trunk release button. Neither of these options were really available to him since he was making his counterattack on Brannon from the rear of the squad. Long guns, whether a rifle or a shotgun, need to be in a location that is immediately accessible to the officer.
Drop the gun! Drop it!
Keeping them in a trunk requires the officer to move to two separate locations: the interior of the squad to obtain the keys or trunk release, and then to the trunk. If the long gun is kept in the squad interior, it can be as simple as pressing a release button, and the officer has full access to the firearm. Officers need to remember that handguns are generally used because the situation has evolved to a potential deadly force encounter. If you know that you're going into a bad situation, you take the best tool for the job. And, in most cases, if there is a potential for deadly force, officers are going to take their rifles or shotguns as their primary firearm. In Kyle's case, he acted appropriately by using his handgun. The situation he was presented with started much lower on the force spectrum.
I'm in fear for my life! Get back here now!
If his rifle had been in the passenger compartment of his squad, Deputy Dinkheller may have been able to retrieve it as Brannon moved back to his truck. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case. Brannon had the more accurate and more powerful gun in this fight. When you speak to Kirk Dinkheller about the events that stole his son from him, there is one thing that he believes had more influence on Kyle that day than anything else.
And I've seen the letters. And I've looked at Kyle's jacket after Kyle was killed. There's no discipline in it. There's nothing. Not one complaint on Kyle until this letter. And then the letter's what got him killed. And you can't convince me otherwise. Nobody can.
The letter he is referring to is an apology letter that Kyle was told to write after a vehicle contact.
This particular instance, there was an accident on the interstate, and they were all running to it, blue lights and sirens, and there was a car in front of them that wouldn't get out of the way of emergency vehicles. So Kyle pulled it over. Well, come to find out, the man that he pulled over was a big financial contributor to the sheriff. So the sheriff, not wanting to lose his money, made Kyle write an apology letter and then hand deliver it to the man.
Having to write this letter may have had a long-lasting influence on how Kyle went about his daily life as an officer. That would include how Kyle handled his interaction with Brannon.
So the apology letter is what got Kyle killed. Otherwise, this would have been a whole different outcome. No doubt in my mind. Kyle would have beat his ass, cuffed him, took him to jail, bloodied or not.
Kirk firmly believes that Kyle didn't take appropriate actions early on with Brannon due to this letter. He believed that Kyle was afraid that he may be disciplined again, or worse, that he could lose his job. Could this fear of discipline have been subconsciously controlling Kyle's actions? While we may never be able to prove what Kyle was thinking during this incident, it does ask the question, can command staff positively or negatively affect an officer's decision-making during a stressful event? Could something such as a letter of apology cause an officer to not take appropriate action and place their lives in greater danger?
As far as I'm concerned, and it's just my opinion, and I talk about it all the time, if command staff doesn't have their officers back and takes their word over a normal citizen, then you don't need to be command staff.
And it's not just command staff that Kirk feels can affect officers' performance in the streets.
And all these politicians need to get their heads out of their asses and start back in law enforcement.
No matter what side you take in that argument, there is one fact that trainers agree on. The less inputs an officer has to deal with during a highly stressful event, the better the outcome. In a nutshell, the more the officer can focus on the threat in front of them, the more likely they are to succeed. Distractions can cause delays or hesitations in choosing the most effective action in order to survive a situation. And survival is the name of the game. To this day, the sheriff refuses to speak to Kirk about the letter.
I've tried to reach out to the sheriff just to talk. Called him for years. Won't return my phone calls. So that speaks volumes to me that as far as I'm concerned, he don't exist to me anymore.
For more than 20 years, law enforcement officers, trainers, and command staff have given their thoughts on this incident. But what is rarely discussed is the aftermath when an officer is killed in the line of duty. Kyle's father, unfortunately, has quite a bit of insight in this matter.
I know what they're going to go through. And it's not a pleasant picture. I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through. Because it's bad.
Families of officers need to be prepared should the unthinkable happen. As hard as it may be to have these talks, imagine how much harder it will be for the survivors without a plan to follow. With no idea of what to expect, it can feel like the world is collapsing in around them at their time of greatest need.
Never had that conversation. You never thought it would happen. It never crossed anybody in my family's mind, and including me. I saw Kyle every day. It never once did I think, oh, hell, he could get killed in the line of duty. It never crossed my mind. So no, we never had a conversation like that. Not until afterwards.
But what happens when an officer is killed? How does it affect that officer's loved ones, the community, the department?
They tell you there's 5 phases to grief when a law enforcement officer gets killed. I've had every one of them. Been there, done that. And they're not fun. I was mean to people. Not physically, but verbally mean. And I had to go back and apologize to everybody. And everybody accepted it, but you still feel like, do you really accept my apology? You have that guilt, but you get over that part. But all the other phases, they'll knock you to your knees.
Family members can react very differently, and after the reality of the situation starts to sink in, it can get even worse.
And then you got to pick up the pieces with your family, because I guarantee you, when something like this happens to a family, the family doesn't stay tight. The family splinters and goes in all kinds of directions. Then after a while, you got to decide, do I want to pick up the pieces, bring the family back together, reunite everybody, and kind of find a common goal and move forward with it. Grieving Kyle, yeah, you'll never stop grieving. Even though Brandon's gone, executed, it doesn't bring Kyle back. People say, well, now you should be back to normal. Brandon's dead. What the hell's normal? So it takes a lot out of you.
Beyond the family and friends, there is another group of people that are exposed to these tragedies: recruit officers. Kyle's video has been shown to officers and recruits around the world. The reactions to the video are sometimes shocking. Kirk recalled an incident where a recruit felt a situation such as Kyle's could never happen to them.
Yeah, well, the last class I did, I'm standing in the back of the classroom, video's playing, and there's this one girl sitting over here to my right, and I kept looking at her. Video's playing, the training tool's up there. She's too busy checking Facebook and Twitter and whatever else crap they got on their phones, not paying attention. So when the video was over and I went up there, she's the first person I jumped. And I asked her, you didn't watch this? I don't need it. That's never going to happen to me. I said, say what? I said, what, you going to work in an office or what? You going to be on the road? I don't need to watch this. It has nothing to do with me. I said, well, I believe you don't need to be in law enforcement. And the director of the academy kind of like jumped her and then 2 days later, she quit.
While other police recruits have left law enforcement altogether after watching the video.
Now, I've had several of them get up after the video's over and they meet me, get up and leave the class and quit. Just walk out and say, I'm done. Say, okay, then that's a good thing. I'd rather you do that than waste instructors and trainers' times to go through the whole class and then wash out in FTO or whatever. So, yeah, it's a lot of them don't need to be there.
While Kyle may not physically be with us anymore, his spirit lives on, training and saving lives every day.
People ask me, why do you keep doing this? As long as I'm showing this video and talking to law enforcement, wherever it might be in the country, Kyle's still here. His spirit and his memory's still here. The day I quit doing this and just walk away and say, okay, let the video stand on its own, I'm not talking no more, then Kyle's truly gone. His spirit, his memory, everything's gone. Some Joe Blow will watch this video down the road and say, yeah, that's pretty bad, and learn from it and then forget about it. But as long as I'm talking about it and then I put my face in front of it and tell my story as far as how it affects a family and affects Kyle's kids, then he's still here.
Using incidents like Kyle's for training isn't attacking them or criticizing their decisions. It's learning and improving the safety of the men and women patrolling the cities, highways, and everywhere in between. Not learning from horrific incidents like Deputy Dinkheller's would be a disservice to everyone that wears a badge.
This training is set up for you. Utilize it. Take it to heart. Apply it out on the street, wherever you're at. Do not become complacent.
And training officers is exactly what Kyle and his dad have been doing for over 20 years. Kirk takes training as serious as officers do. So much so that he has a special message for the officers watching this.
Training is the ultimate tool that you have in your bag of tricks. All the other stuff, all the little gadgets and gizmos is great. I love all that stuff. All the guns you have, that's fine. But without training, none of those tools are worth a damn in the bag. Keep training. Yeehaw.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Yippee-ki-yay.
We would like to thank Kirk Dinkheller for sharing his son's story with the world, for helping make officers safer as they do their job, for helping recruits know the evil that is lurking out there, waiting for an opportunity that perhaps won't be there, thanks to Kyle.